Hi, welcome back to Educator.com's AP Music Theory course, and today's lesson is on triads. So for this lesson, our objectives are to learn diatonic triads, and we're going to look at them both in major and minor keys. And after that, we're going to learn how to build and spell triads independently of keys, just thinking about major and minor, augmented and diminished forms. So to start learning the triads in major, let's look at, if we take a key such as, let's use C major with no accidentals, let's look at the triads that occur in C major diatonically, that is, with no accidentals added. So I'll start by building a triad on each degree of C. So here's our first one on C, and we'll have one on each scale degree. So first one was these three notes here, C, E, G. So the second one is D, F, A. And the third is E, G, B. F, A, C. G, B, D. A, C, E. And the last one on the seventh degree is B, D, F. So to classify these triads, because they are different from each other, there are a few things that we do. First of all, we number them with Roman numerals, starting with 1, 2, 3. And there's a reason why some are lowercase and some are uppercase, and we'll talk about that. 4, 5, 6, and 7. So as you might have guessed, the reason why some of these Roman numerals are in uppercase and some are lowercase has to do with the quality of the triad. So the uppercase Roman numerals are major triads. So this would be a major chord, this a major chord, and this one a major chord, 5. And the lowercase triads are minor chords. So 2, 3, 6 are minor. And then we have one other chord occurring in a major key diatonically, which is this lowercase Roman numeral with a circle, which is a diminished triad. So any key, any major key that we look at, we will find this exact same distribution of diatonic triads. Let's do another one as an example. So what about E major? So if we remember our key signature from the key signature lesson, in E major we have 4 sharps. So F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp. And I'll just begin exactly as before with the E major scale. And now the triads. So here's a major 1, here's a minor 2, here's the minor 3, and the major 4, 5, 6, and finally 7, diminished. And of course, this is music theory, so there's no shortage of terminology. There is also a term for each one of these triad degrees based on the Roman numerals. So 1 is the tonic degree. 2 is the supertonic. 3 is the mediant. 4 is the subdominant. 5 is the dominant. And 6, I will write up here, is the submediant. And 7 will come here, is the subtonic. So these are the triads in major keys. And one thing I want to note is that starting with this lesson, we are building on skills that we've acquired previously. For instance, key signatures become very important in understanding what notes have what accidentals when we're dealing with these keys. And this will help us in determining triads on different notes because, for instance, if someone asks you for a minor triad like this one that begins on an F sharp as the root, you'd be able to think about E major with 4 sharps and then going to the second degree and finding what the notes are in that triad. So in minor keys, we find a different distribution of triads. So let's start with the minor key with no key signature first, A minor. And I'm just going to write out the natural minor scale here on A. And so here's the first triad, which is 1. 2, here's the diminished triad in minor. And you can compare these to the corresponding chords in C major, since they have the same key signature. So here's the C major, which in A is the 3. And then minor 4, minor 5. Here's the major 6. And in minor, the 7th chord is also major. So now let's transpose this pattern to a new key, and just to see the similarities. So let's take D minor. So we have 1 flat in the key signature, and here's the scale. And again, I can just copy the numbers from above, since I know they're going to be exactly the same. So, as we see, the pattern of triads in minor is minor, diminished, major, minor, minor, major, and major. And again, this will help us when we're building triads on different notes and scale degrees. So let's look at the structure of a major triad. So let's take the first one we encountered, which was this one on C, C, E, G, and let's look at the intervals that make up these major triads. So on one hand, we've got this interval of a C to an E, which if you remember back to the interval lesson, we know is a major third. And we've got this other third stacked on top of that from an E to a G, which is, of course, a minor third. And then the fifth from C to G is, of course, a perfect fifth. So the important thing to note here is that a major triad starts with a major third on the bottom and a minor third on top. Let's look at the other example we had in E major. And we can see that, of course, it has the same structure with E to G sharp being the major third and G sharp to B being the minor third. Now, let's see if we can use some of the knowledge that we've seen today to construct a triad on a note that we haven't seen a major triad on yet. What about if we take E flat as our root note of the triad? So we want a major chord built on E flat. So one thing we could do is we could think about E flat major as our key, since the major triad would, of course, be in the key signature. And first spell out a triad. So this is some kind of triad with an E flat, a G, and a B. And then make sure that all the notes have the correct accidental for the key signature. So here is E flat, and this would be a 1. So let's put the key signature in, and we see that all we were missing was a flat on the B. And if we want to confirm this, we can do many things. We can look at the intervals and confirm again that this is a major third and this is a minor third, and you can play these on your instrument or sing them. And the other thing we can do is we can look at this triad compared to this E major triad that we have up here, and we see that every single one of these notes is a half step lower or a minor second lower than an E major triad, which we've maybe become more familiar with. So there's lots of different angles to use, and the more of these techniques you have at your fingertips, the more quicker you'll become fluent with them. Let's do one more major triad. What about on, let's take a D flat. So we know that we're going to have some kind of F and some kind of A in this triad, and we're looking for, this turns out to be 1, of course, in D flat major. And if we remember our D flat major key signature, we can write it here. And we see that we were missing only the flat over the A. So it gives us D flat, F, A flat. Okay, let's do the same exercise with minor triads. So starting with our 1 in A minor, which was A, C, E, we can check out the structure of the minor triad. So it's, of course, the opposite of a major triad. We have a minor third on the bottom, A to C, and the major third on the top. And our other example was from D minor. And again, we can confirm using our knowledge from the interval lesson that this is in fact a minor third and a major third on the top. So let's find a couple more minor triads that we haven't encountered yet. What about one on, let's say, F sharp? So we know that F sharp minor is a key signature with 3 sharps. So I'll draw in the key signature and then the A and the C that we need. And from the key signature, I can see that the C, in fact, needs to be sharped. And maybe if you're not so comfortable with F sharp minor, you can try finding F sharp as a 2 chord in E major, since we know that the 2 chord is also minor and that the second scale degree of E is F sharp. So we can do the same thing, and this time use the key signature for E major, which gives us the same result. And these I'm just showing different ways of coming up with these triads. Of course, the third way to find the F sharp minor triad or any other minor triad is to look at the structure. So we need a minor third from F sharp, which we've learned as A, and then we need a major third from A to some kind of C, which we can confirm is a C sharp. So all different ways to come up with triads. Okay, the diminished triad, the first one that we saw was in C major. And if you remember back, it was on the 7th degree, which means the root note is B. So we have this chord with B, D, and F. And let's look at the intervals for this chord. So B to D is a minor third, and D to F is another minor third. So a diminished triad is built by stacking 2 minor thirds on top of each other. And just for more practice, we can use the one from E major again. So that one was D sharp, F sharp, A because of the key signature. And again, we can go through and play these or count the intervals and find that they are in fact 2 minor thirds. So let's find a diminished triad, this time let's use key signature instead of a root note. So what about if we want the diminished triad in B major? So the question might look like this and not supply any root note. So we need to think about B major, and maybe as a good practice, first we can write in the key signature, F sharp, C sharp, D sharp, A sharp. Okay, and then we need to think what is the 7th degree scale degree in B, which is of course A sharp. And since we've got the key signature here, all we have to do is fill in the rest of the triad. And I'm going to repeat the accidentals here just to make it even more clear. And as a check, we can always make sure that both of these are minor thirds. And for the last example, let's find a diminished triad in a minor key. So what about if we go to B minor instead? So in minor, we remember that the diminished triad is the 2nd degree. And the signature for B minor is 2 sharps. And of course, the 2nd scale degree in B would be a C, which in this case is a C sharp. And again, all we have to do is fill out the rest of the triad because we've got the key signature there, letting us know of any accidentals we need. In this case, we don't. So once we confirm that these are minor thirds, we have a diminished triad on C sharp root note. Okay, and the fourth and last type of triad we'll talk about today is the augmented triad. And we haven't seen this occur diatonically in major and minor keys. So for now, we'll have to build it artificially. So we'll start with a C major chord. And the structure of the augmented triad is opposite of the diminished triad. So it's got a major third on the bottom, and it needs a major third on the top, which means that we are going to have to raise this G to a G sharp. So this gives us an augmented triad with C as the root note, and we can represent it with a plus. So let's start with our E major chord, E, G sharp, B, and turn this into an augmented chord. So again, we have a major third on the bottom, and we need a major third on the top. So we're going to go ahead and turn this B into a B sharp. Now, of course, you might be tempted to maybe substitute an harmonic note for this B sharp and write the augmented triad maybe with a C instead of a B sharp, since on the piano it looks like the same note, or even over here, this G sharp might have been written as an A flat. And of course, it will give you the same sound, but for our theoretical purposes, these triads always have to be spelled in thirds. So it's always going to be, if E is the root note, it's always going to be some kind of G and some kind of B finishing out the triad, whether or not the B is sharped or double sharped or flat or even double flatted. Depends on the type of triad. So let's make 2 more augmented triads. And maybe this time we'll start with a minor chord as our starting point. So let's start with that minor chord on A. So now we need 2 major thirds. So we had a minor third on the bottom, so we'll turn this into a C sharp, and that gives us our first major third. And for our second major third, now we have turned this C to an E, to a C sharp to an E, which is a minor third. So again, we need to raise the E. And this gives us our second major third, turning this into an augmented triad on A. And if we wanted to check this, we could start with an A major chord. Here's the key signature. So we know that 1 in A major is, of course, always going to be an A major chord. And according to the key signature, I need a sharp on the C. And now we know that all we have to do to a major chord to make it augmented is to raise the 5th by 1/2 step. So this turns out to be an A augmented chord, which matches the one we made here earlier. Okay, now let's do some examples. These things might be typical to questions you'll see on a music theory test. So example 1, we'll do a major chord. And let's say that we are supplied with a root note of G. And the question is asking for a major triad on G. So what we need to do is think about where we can find a major triad on G. And of course, the simplest thing would be to think about a G major scale. So we can add a key signature for G major, which is 1 sharp, and then build the triad. And we see that we don't need to add any accidentals because we're not using this note F sharp. And so right away we know that this is a major chord because it occurs in G major on the first scale degree. Okay, for a second example, let's say a question asks for a minor chord. And let's pretend that the note that they've supplied us to begin with is not the root of the chord, but the third. So they've got an E flat here, and we need to find a minor chord with E flat as the third. So first, we need to write in the notes that we know are going to be in the triad. So it's going to be some kind of C, of course, to some kind of G. And then we know that a minor third consists, or a minor triad, excuse me, consists of a minor third on the bottom and a major third on the top. So we'll go ahead and find what interval this is here from C to E flat. And using our knowledge from the interval lesson, we know that C to E flat is a minor third. And one of the ways we know that is because of C minor, of course, the key of C minor. So in C minor, we see that C to an E is actually C to E flat, which is the beginning of our minor triad. And to finish that thought, we can add the G above the E flat and see that it's also a G like we've got here. So in this case, we got lucky in the 2 notes we added. We don't need to add any other accidentals to them. And it makes a minor triad naturally occurring in C minor. Okay, for example 3, let's find a diminished chord. And let's say that we are starting on an F sharp. And this is in fact the root of the chord. So we know that in a major key, the diminished triad occurs on the 7th degree. So we can think back to our keys and think which major key has F sharp as its 7th scale step. Well, we know that there's a half step between the 7th and 8th scale steps of a major key. So that means that if F sharp was the 7th degree, G would be the 8th degree, or the tonic. So G major works for us in this case. So we saw previously that G major has 1 sharp in the key signature. So we can finish out this triad, and we see that we don't need to add any accidentals to the A and the C. And what we've got, I'll write it again over here, turns out to be a diminished chord, which is the 7th degree in G major. And for the last example, let's find an augmented chord. And this time, let's say the question starts us off with the 5th of the chord. So let's look at an augmented chord, and the note they've given us is E, which is going to be the 5th of that triad. So we know that all these triads are going to be spelled in thirds, so immediately we can write a C and an A below. And then we think back to our augmented structure, which we know is major third, major third. So we need to make sure that both of these turn out to be major thirds. So let's look at E going down to C first. So we know from our key signatures again, or from our interval knowledge, that C to E is in fact a major third because it happens in C major diatonically. So this is fine. And then looking from C to A, we've already seen it several times today. That's, of course, the bottom two notes of a minor triad. So in this case, this is a minor third. So to turn this minor third into a major third, what we need to do is make it wider by 1/2 step. And of course, we can't take the C up because that will affect the major third we've already got up here. So what I'll do is add a flat to the A, which takes this minor third to a major third, giving us the right structure for an augmented triad. Okay, thanks for watching educator.com's triads example for the AP Music Theory class.